Hi, hello everyone. My name is Dr. Wing Lam. Welcome to this section. And I'm the faculty member of AMBS. In this lecture, I will discuss the topic of diary studies and multi-level modeling with you. If you have any question, just feel free to let me know, and I'm very happy to discuss with you. Thank you. Before we start the section, let me briefly introduce myself. I came from Hong Kong, and I worked for the Hong Kong Polytechnic University for almost 14 years. Last year, I worked at AMBS, University of Manchester. I moved to the UK with my family. My research focused mainly on three areas. The first one is proactivities. Employees nowadays were taking initiative to help the organization to improve. And so my research is focused on what happened and why employees were taking initiative to engage in proactive behavior to help organizations. The second research focus is on leadership. My major focus is on the dark side of leadership. I'm interested to see what happened and why the supervisor will abuse the subordinates and how the subordinates respond if they are being mistreated by their supervisor. Thirdly, my research focus is on emotional labor. Emotional labor refers to the manipulation and the efforts in the employees display emotion even though they're not very happy at work, but because they have to display some happy emotions, and so they also need to perform emotional labor to manipulate, to manage their displayed emotion. This is what we call emotional labor. My research focused on why and how the employees engage in emotional labor and what are the consequences of that. Lastly, I'm also working on some consultancy and I have some experience in helping the organization to solve the business problem, providing some suggestions and advices on the leadership issue, productivity issue, and also in some customer service issues. If you would like to have a more further discussion, please let me know. And I hope you enjoy this class. Thank you. This is the lecture outline. First, we will discuss the Experience Sampling Method, ESM. This methodology is used to assess the repeated measurements of the same participants, to examine the fluctuation of the assessing variables over a period of time. Second, we will discuss the multi-level modeling using SPSS mixed model. In this lecture, we will focus both on the theory and practical exercise. Although many research are using traditional cross-sectional studies designed, that is, to collecting the data at only one time point. However, still lots of the problem occurred when using traditional cross-sectional design. And one of the problems is that we can only test the general behavioral style instead of situation-specific strategies. That is, the researchers can only test the employee's behavioral style or the psychological reaction only in the general manner, instead of trying to see the behavioral changes according to the situational specific context. Therefore, as you can see that in the questionnaire surveyed, and the respondents are always being asked the questions such as, in general, what do you do and what do you feel? And so they're testing about in general situation and how people react and how people think. And so it is not situation specific. The second problem is that the cross-sectional research can usually test the inter-individual variance instead of the intra-individual variance. It means that we can test the differences of the people in terms of the behavior and psychological reaction instead of the changes, the variations of the individual behavior based on different situations and over a period of time. And so far, you can see that if we have some question like, is a person more satisfied with her job when job control increases? And obviously, this kind of a question is situation specific question. We would like to see the situation of the job control when it increases and whether the individuals will feel more satisfied or not. And so, according to the design of the cross-sectional study, we cannot test this type of the situation-specific questions. Besides that, especially with regard to the interventions, and we are usually more interested to see how people will vary across their behavior and their psychological reaction. Say, for example, like if the company, they have some training, intervention. And so we would like to see, we would like to test how people will vary across different training over the period of time. And so that's why, again, the cross-sectional studies cannot help us to test these research questions. Indeed, we can only see that the cross-sectional studies can help us to draw the conclusions from the inter-individual differences. We can test the differences of the individual in terms of the behavior as well as the psychological reaction, but in a more general sense. Researchers may also use experimental study design to conduct the research. Especially, some of the researchers will use the lab studies in order to investigate in certain situations, so what the respondents will react. Of course, this type of the experimental situation is manipulating because the researchers are setting up certain scenarios, and so it is not very realistic as compared to the natural environment. And so this is one of the problem of using experimental studies, that is having the experimental study designed and the researchers cannot truly test the respondents' reaction in a more realistic sense. Because of this problem, and probably we can consider to use the diary studies. In the previous researchers also mentioned that people's behavior is a function of both person and the situations. We have to include both the personal factors as well as the situational factors in order to explain people's behavior. Some of the examples like conflict management strategies. People, of course, they got certain demographic information, personality, etc., in order to affecting what conflict management strategies that the individual do when they are negotiating with others. But they will also need to consider about in what situation and what negotiation strategies that they have to use. So we cannot only rely on person's factors, but we also need to consider about the situational factors. Some other examples like stress management strategies, emotion regulation strategies, mood problem solving strategies is also saying that it's quite important. We can not only focusing on the people characteristic in order to explain the behavior of the individual. Instead of people's behavior will vary, it depends on the situation. That's why we cannot only rely on the typical measurement that will to examine the general tendency or the general factors, general styles of the behavior of the individual. Instead, we have to use the diary studies in order to capture the behavior that depends on the situation. several important points that we have to address when we consider whether we should use diary studies. The traditional cross-sectional questionnaire design is very questionable if the behavior is highly fluctuating and highly depends on the situation context. That's why we said that because the traditional cross-sectional design is to use to capture the general behavioral style of the individual. It cannot capture to what extent that the behavior will be fluctuated and changed according to different situation. Second, the cross-sectional design cannot help to capture and examine the short-term fluctuation of the behavior. Some of the researchers may use the multiple time point longitudinal research design for the questionnaire. However, it still cannot help to capture those short-term fluctuations, such as the daily fluctuation or the hourly fluctuation, etc. Because remember that for the traditional cross-sectional design and can only collect the data at one time point. So we cannot have any variation of the behavioral changes data. A diary study allows to study a sample of the situation a person is in, for example, like the service provider, because they have the customer interaction, and so there are a couple of the situation, different situation that they have to deal with, different customers. So a diary studies probably is more preferable than the traditional cross-sectional questionnaire design. Because remember that some of the interaction with the customers could be very pleasant, but some might be quite stressful. That's why the service provider may try and display a friendly smile, but in different cases with different strategies. That's why if we're using a traditional cross-sectional design to ask what strategies that you have to use in order to deal with the customers, you cannot help to capture, you cannot help to test in what situation, in to what which customers interactions, and so which strategies that you use. That's why in this situation, we have to consider to adopt the diary studies to test in which situation, in which type of the customers, and so what type of the emotional regulation strategies need to use in order to present their smile, to display their smile to different customers. I'm going to show you one of the personal experience to illustrate the needs for the diary studies. And some years ago, my family and I visited Hangzhou to go to when traveling. And so on the first date, my daughter, the little ones, was so excited because, well, she expected she can have a great holiday in Hangzhou, China. And so as you can see that he got a very positive and wonderful smiling face out the plane to Hangzhou. However, on the next day, because I have to work, and so that's why we stayed in the hotel, we did not arrange any activities outside. She was quite upset because she doesn't have a chance to go out, and well, we have all to stay in the hotel. In day three, because well, I saw that she was not very happy, so that's why we went out to have some dim sum and a dumpling at a restaurant. And so she was very, very happy because she has a chance to go out and eat some foods that she likes. On the fourth date, and well, because before that we will need to have some visits in some of the tourist spots in Hangzhou. That's why we went to the West Lake, a very famous lake in China, in Hangzhou, and we took some pictures. And well, we have a walk besides the lake, and well, I also asked my daughters to take some photos. However, for the For the children, they don't like this kind of the tourist sports. Instead, they like to go to the park and also some children museum instead. And so when I asked her to take some photos, and well, she doesn't look very happy. In day 5 and 6, she was very, very happy because it was her first time to see the snow. And so it was having a very heavy snow on that day. That's why, well, she was very, very happy. In day 6, because, well, it was snowing, that's why we visited the West Lake again. And, well, this time she was very, very happy. It's totally different from the day before. The day before, because no snowing, and so well, she didn't want to take the photos. But now in day 6, with snows, she was very excited, and as you can see that she smiled happily in the photo because it was snowing. And so, this personal story is telling us that if we are using the cross-sectional design to capture the happiness, the emotion of my daughter, and so it cannot truly reflect it, her own emotion. Say, for example, like if you ask in general, what do you think about the emotion? What do you think about the the trip to Hangzhou? And well, how could she respond to this question? Happy or not happy? Well, it's really hard to say because as you can see that over the week, in some days she was particularly happy, but in some days she was particularly unhappy. So it is very hard to conclude that whether the trip is happy or not. Instead, if we're using the diary research design to ask whether you're happy on this particular day or not happy on another particular day, and so it is easier to capture the fluctuation of her emotions over the week. That's why, as you can see that when we would like to measure the quality of the everyday life, we have to use the diary research design. With this design, it helps to measure affect, behavior, force, and also the situation context several times per day for one or more times or overall period of time. So you can see that having a diary research design can help us to capture the fluctuation of the emotion, force, and behavior over a period of time.